The morning Lena Hartwell left her father's field unplowed, 3 farmers stopped along Mill Creek Road and laughed like they were watching a child ruin a grown man's work. It was mid-March in western Tennessee, the kind of morning farmers wait for. The wet cold had finally lifted. The ground was soft enough to turn, but not so soft it swallowed the tractor tires. The air smelled of diesel, damp clay, and spring coming fast. Every field along Red Fork Creek was being worked before the sun had fully cleared the trees. Every farmer knew the rule. When the ground gives you a planting window, you take it. You do not wait. You do not waste daylight. And you certainly do not leave good bottomland standing in weeds. But Lena did. She drove her father's old green tractor straight down the low field, then turned the wheel before the plow reached a long strip of wild grass near the creek. She circled it. Then she circled it again. By the time she was finished, most of the field had been turned dark and clean, but one long green strip remained untouched, running like a strange wound between the plowed soil and the creek bank. Otis Barlow saw it first. He leaned both arms on the roadside fence and stared across the field. Then he laughed. "Well, look at that," he said. Elias Hartwell's girl just left the richest part of his field standing. Wade Mercer climbed out of his truck and followed Otis's finger. "That ain't standing," Wade said. "That's wasting." Harold Pike, who never missed a chance to laugh when someone else looked foolish, shook his head and grinned. "Maybe she thinks weeds bring a harvest now." Their laughter carried across the field. Lena heard every word. She was 19, slim from hard work, with her brown hair tucked under a faded cap, and her father's old gloves hanging loose around her wrists. She looked too young to be steering that tractor alone and too calm to be making the mistake they all thought she was making. Otis cupped one hand around his mouth. "Your daddy would have had that field finished by breakfast." Lena kept driving. That made him louder. Shame sickness put a good farm in the hands of a girl. The tractor engine covered most of it, but not enough. Lena's jaw tightened. Only once. Then she looked toward the creek, looked back at the strip of tall grass, and kept the plow away from it. By noon, the story had already reached the feed store. By evening, men who had not even seen the field were laughing about it. Elias Hartwell's daughter had left part of his best ground unplowed, and nobody could decide whether she was stubborn, lazy, or simply too young to know what she was throwing away. But that was the part nobody understood. Lena was not throwing anything away. She was waiting to see whether an old warning was true. Before we find out whether Lena was right or wrong, what would you have done? Plow the strip or leave it standing? Let me know below. The Hartwell farm sat in one of the lowest pockets along Red Fork Creek. It was 41 acres of hard history. Enough land to keep a family working, but never enough to let them rest. Elias had held it together for almost 30 years, with patience, repairs, and the kind of quiet endurance nobody applauds because everyone around you is doing the same thing. But his heart had begun failing 2 winters earlier. At first, he only slowed down. Then he stopped climbing ladders. Then he stopped lifting feed sacks. Then one morning, Lena found him sitting on the barn floor with one hand pressed against his chest, trying to convince her he had only lost his balance. After that, the farm changed hands without anyone saying it. Elias still knew the land. Lena worked it. She had taken over before she felt ready. There had been no ceremony, no proud announcement, no handshake from neighboring men who suddenly accepted her. She simply woke before daylight, fed what needed feeding, fixed what broke, drove what had to be driven, and came inside at night with mud on her jeans and silence in her mouth. The farm was already under strain. 2 poor seasons had thinned the money. A doctor's bill lay folded inside a cigar box in the kitchen. Under it sat a letter from the bank, the kind with polite language and sharp teeth. Elias had not said much after reading it. He only folded it twice, placed it back in the box, and looked out the window toward the low field. Lena had seen that look before. A farmer does not need to say when he is afraid of losing land. The land says it for him. That was why the unplowed strip looked so foolish. They could not afford a mistake. They could not afford wasted ground. They could not afford to be the family people whispered about in town while pretending not to. And yet, Lena had left the grass standing. That evening, after the mocking had passed from the road to the store to every porch within 5 miles, Lena walked into the house and found Elias sitting at the kitchen table. The cigar box was open. The bank letter was beside his hand. He did not mention it. He only looked at her muddy boots, then toward the field beyond the window. "You heard them?" Lena nodded. Otis was loud enough for the crows to hear. Elias smiled faintly, but it did not stay. "You left that strip wide." "I know. Wider than a mistake." Lena pulled off her cap and held it in both hands. For a moment, she looked less like the young woman who had faced the road without flinching, and more like a daughter who wanted badly for her father not to be disappointed. Elias studied her. "You want to tell me why?" Lena looked toward the stairs that led to the loft above the back room, where she had hidden a bundle of old notebooks wrapped in cloth. Not hidden because she was ashamed. Hidden because she was not ready for anyone to laugh at those two. "I found something," she said. Elias waited. "In Grandpa Caleb's old things." At the sound of his father's name, Elias leaned back slowly. Caleb Hartwell had been dead for 26 years. He had farmed before bigger tractors came to the county, before most men tiled their low fields, before people believed a problem could always be fixed by cutting deeper, draining faster, plowing cleaner. Caleb had been called old-fashioned even when he was alive, a man who watched water as closely as he watched crops, a man who marked storm years in notebooks, a man who wrote down where the land failed and where it held. Lena had found those notebooks that winter in the loft above the equipment shed, wrapped in oilcloth, stored in a crate beneath cracked window frames and a broken seed spreader. At first, she thought they were only family history. Then she found the map. It was not a proper map, just a hand-drawn sketch of the Hartwell Low Field and the bend of Red Fork Creek. But Caleb had marked one place darker than the rest, a long strip beside the water, almost exactly where Lena had driven around that morning. Beneath the drawing were several words Lena had read so many times she could see them when she closed her eyes. She did not repeat them to Otis. She did not repeat them at the feed store. And that night, she did not even repeat them fully to her father. She only said, "Grandpa marked that strip." Elias looked out at the field again. "The one you left?" "Yes." "And you trust a dead man's drawing over every living farmer on this road?" Lena swallowed. "I trust what he saw." The room went quiet. Outside, frogs had begun calling from the wet ditch. Elias's breathing sounded rougher than it had that morning, but his eyes were clear. After a while, he said, "Then we'll see what he saw." That was all. No speech, no warning, no blessing. But Lena knew her father well enough to understand what he had given her. He had given her permission to look foolish, and sometimes that is the hardest permission to receive. April came wet, but not frightening at first. The first rain filled the ditches and darkened the field. The second left soft mud around the barn. The third pushed Red Fork Creek against its banks, but not over them. Every farmer along Mill Creek Road had seen springs like that. There was nothing dramatic enough to make anyone worried. Nothing that would make men stop laughing at Lana's strip of grass. But Lena began watching the field differently. After each rain, before breakfast if she could, she walked to the low ground with a notebook in one hand and a line of sharpened sticks tucked under her arm. She marked where the water had reached. She marked where mud collected. She marked where the grass bent. She marked where the creek had left leaves and brown foam tangled in the stems. She did not explain it to anyone, not even fully to Elias. When he asked what she was seeing, she only said, "Something changes there." "What changes?" "The water." "How?" She looked at the field. "I don't know enough yet." That answer would have sounded foolish to anyone else. But Elias understood. Good land never gives up all its secrets at once. One morning, Wade Mercer drove by and found Lena crouched beside the wild strip, scraping mud from the grass with a pocket knife. He slowed his truck. "You studying weeds now?" Lena stood, brushed her hands on her jeans and waved. Wade laughed and drove on. 2 days later, Otis Barlow saw her pushing another stick into the ground. "Careful," he called from his tractor. "You keep feeding that weed patch, it may start asking rent." Lena did not answer. That bothered Otis more than an argument would have. By early May, the rows above the strip had begun to green. The plants were young even, and fragile. The kind of green that makes a farmer hopeful and afraid at the same time. Across the road, Otis's field looked cleaner. No weeds, no tall grass, no strange strip interrupting the rows. He had plowed right to the creek edge, as he always had. So had Wade. So had Harold. Their fields looked like fields were supposed to look. Lena's field looked unfinished. That word followed her through town. Unfinished. At the feed store, someone said Elias must be too sick to check the work. At church, 2 women lowered their voices when Lena passed, then smiled too brightly when she looked back. Even the county extension man, Mr. Pritchard, paused beside her father's truck one afternoon and said gently, "If you need help getting that bottom strip turned before it gets away from you, I can ask around." Lena thanked him. She did not explain. Because the truth was, she was not yet certain enough to carry the weight of being right, and she could not afford to be wrong. At night, when Elias slept, Lena took out Caleb's notebooks. She read his rainfall dates, his watermarks, his sketches, his odd phrases that sounded more like warnings than farming notes. Do not hurry water. Do not strip the creek clean. Let the rough ground stand where the current wants to run. And the line under the drawing, the one she had not said aloud yet. Each time she read it, the words felt less like an old man's habit and more like instruction. But still, she waited. The real test had not come. Be honest, if your family's farm was already struggling and the bank was waiting, would you trust an old notebook over what every living farmer was telling you? It came in June. The first warning came over the radio while Lena was patching a tear in a feed sack. A weather system had stalled west of the river. Heavy rain expected. Low areas should prepare. By supper, the sky had changed color. Not gray exactly. Heavier than gray. Like iron left too long in the fire. Elias sat near the kitchen window with a blanket over his knees, watching the clouds gather over the field. "You moved the pump?" "To the loft. Seed bags?" "Stacked high." "Tractor?" "By the upper barn." He nodded. Then he looked toward the low field. "And the strip?" Lena followed his eyes. In the distance, the wild grass was moving under the first wind. "It's still there." Elias smiled a little. "I suppose that's the point." Lena tried to smile back, but fear had settled too deeply in her ribs. The bank letter was still in the cigar box. The crop was still young. The creek was still too close. And every farmer who had laughed would know by the end of the week whether Lena Hartwell had been wise or foolish. Rain started before midnight. At first, it tapped the roof. Then it pressed against the windows. By morning, it was falling in long gray sheets across the yard. The road ditches filled. The clay path to the barn turned slick. Red Fork Creek rose quietly, the way dangerous water often does, not with drama but with patience. By the second day, low corners of fields began shining with standing water. By the third, men along Mill Creek Road stopped laughing at anything. They moved equipment. They checked culverts. They walked fence lines in soaked coats and came back with mud up to their knees. Otis Barlow's lower field took water first. Wade Mercer's corn rows began to disappear beneath a brown sheet. Harold Pike's creek bank started to crumble where the current had been cutting at it for years. And still the rain kept coming. There is a sound rain makes when it has become too much. It is not the sound of weather anymore. It is the sound of something taking inventory. By Sunday morning, Red Fork Creek had left its banks. By Sunday afternoon, the Hartwell low field was in its path. Lena stood on the porch with her coat buttoned wrong and her boots unlaced. Elias tried to rise from his chair. She turned before he could. "No, I can make it to the fence." "No, you can't." His pride flashed first. Then his body answered for him. He sat back, breathing hard, angry at his own weakness. Lena softened her voice. "I'll tell you what I see." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me the truth when you come back." "I will. Even if it's bad. Even then." She stepped into the rain. The yard was slick. The ditch beside the barn had become a narrow brown stream. By the time she reached the low field, water was already moving across the lower edge. It came from the creek carrying leaves, sticks, torn grass, and pale mud. It slid across bare soil quickly, finding small channels between the furrows. Where the ground was open, the water seemed to gain confidence. Lena's hands went cold inside her gloves. For one terrible moment, she thought she had misunderstood everything. The water was too wide, too heavy, too determined. No strip of grass could stand against that. Then the first rush reached the wild growth. The tall stems bent. The current pushed into them. The grass flattened under the force, and the water changed. It did not stop. That was not the miracle. The miracle was smaller than that, and more important, it slowed. The brown current that had been cutting straight across the plowed soil lost its clean path. It broke apart inside the dense grass. It spread sideways, turning uncertain, dragging its mud and debris into the stems. The grass took the first blow. The silt began to drop there, not beyond it, there, at the edge of the strip. A pale line formed in the rain where the flood's burden settled before it could crawl up into the rows. Lena stood still as the water moved around her boots. And only then did Caleb Hartwell's sentence come fully back to her. Not as writing, as proof. The rough ground takes the beating so the field can live. That was what the old man had written. Not in those exact words every time, but in every sketch, every mark, every note. That was what he had known. That was what the man at the fence had not seen. The grass was not wasted ground. It was the place where the flood spent its strength. For almost an hour, Lena watched. The strip bent, filled, and caught what the creek threw at it. Behind it, the rows were wet. Some plants were down, some would not recover. But the field was not buried. The water had touched it. It had not taken it. When Lena finally returned to the house, Elias was standing at the window, one hand gripping the frame. She opened the door and stood there dripping onto the floor. He did not ask whether the field was fine. Farmers know better than to ask for miracles. He asked, "How bad?" Lena took off her wet cap. "The grass is ruined." Elias closed his eyes. Then Lena said, "But the rows behind it are still there." His eyes opened. For a moment, the rain was the only sound in the room. Then Elias sat down slowly, as if his legs had forgotten how to hold relief. "Caleb," he whispered. Lena looked toward the window. "No," she said softly. "The land." By Monday, the damage along Mill Creek Road was plain. Otis lost a section of creek bank he had spent years building back. The flood had cut under it and carried the soil downstream in a single morning. Wade's lower corn lay under a crust of silt. Harold's field drained late and left behind a hard, pale layer that would take weeks to break. Other farms looked the same. Brown water gone. Brown damage left behind. But at the Hartwell place, the strangest thing was not what the flood had done. It was where it had stopped. The grass strip looked awful. It was mashed flat, clogged with sticks, mud, leaves, and creek trash. But beyond it, the crop rows still showed. Wet, bruised, alive. Otis Barlow drove past 3 times that Tuesday. The first time, he did not stop. The second time, he slowed. The third time, he pulled beside the fence and sat in his truck with both hands on the steering wheel. Lena saw him from the barn. She did not go out. Some things have to walk toward you on their own. The next morning, he did. Otis came across the yard with his hat in one hand. He looked different without the laugh on his face. Smaller somehow, not weak. Just honest in a way loss forces a man to be. Lena was oiling a hinge on the barn door when his shadow crossed the ground. "I need to ask you something," he said. She kept the oil can in her hand. "About what?" He looked toward the low field. "You know about what?" Lena waited. Otis swallowed. "I need you to show me why your field held." That was not an apology. Not yet. But it was the first true thing he had said to her all spring. So Lena set the oil can down and walked with him. They crossed the yard, past the tractor shed, and came to the edge of the low field. Otis stopped at the grass strip. For a long time, he only looked. The silt line was clear now, a pale band where the flood had dropped its load. On one side, the ruined grass. On the other, the living rows. Otis stared at that line the way a man stares at a bill he cannot pay. "My field took it straight in," he said. Lena said nothing. "Water cut right through the plow lines," he continued. "Didn't slow down till it hit the ditch. By then it had half my topsoil with it." He looked at her. "What made you leave this?" Lena could have said, "You laughed." She could have said, "You should have listened." She could have said a dozen things that would have been fair. Instead, she said, "My grandfather marked it." Otis frowned. "Marked it where?" Lena turned and walked back to the house. When she returned, she carried Caleb Hartwell's notebook wrapped in cloth. She opened it carefully on the hood of the tractor. The pages fluttered in the damp air. Otis leaned over them. There was the drawing of the field. There was Red Fork Creek. There was the dark band along the low edge, and beneath it, in Caleb's old handwriting, the line Lena had carried alone for months. "The rough ground takes the beating so the field can live." Otis read it once, then again. His face changed slowly, not because he understood every part of it, because he understood enough. "He saw this before?" "He watched it for years," Lena said. "He wrote down where the water went, where it cut, where it slowed, where the silt dropped." Otis looked back toward the strip. "And you trusted that?" "I tested it." He looked at her then, really looked. Not like a neighbor looking at a girl. Not like an older farmer looking at someone too young. Like a man looking at another farmer. "I said something about your daddy." Lena closed the notebook. Yes. I shouldn't have. No, she said. You shouldn't have. Otis nodded. The apology sat between them, plain and imperfect. Then he looked toward the road, toward his own damaged field. My bend by the sycamores, he said. You think it needs one of these? Lena followed his gaze. The old Lena, the one from before that spring, might have rushed to answer. This Lena took her time. The water turns different there, she said. We'd have to walk it after rain. Otis let out a breath. We? Lena looked at him. You asked me to show you. He nodded slowly. I did. If you were standing where Lena stood, would you have forgiven Otis that quickly? Or would you have made him carry the shame a little longer? Tell me in the comments, because moments like this are where pride, patience, and character all meet. Wade Mercer came 2 days later. Harold Pike came the next week. Neither arrived laughing. They came in work boots, still stained from their own losses, asking short questions and listening longer than they spoke. Lena showed them the silt line, the stakes, the map, the notebook. She did not lecture them. She did not shame them. She did not pretend the strip had saved every plant. It had not. The field had still been hurt. But there is a difference between hurt and ruined. And every farmer standing there understood that difference. The county extension agent came after hearing 3 versions of the story from 3 embarrassed men. Mrs. Nora Bell arrived with a measuring tape, a clipboard, and the careful face of someone who had learned not to believe every miracle reported from a farm road. Then she saw the line. She walked the strip once, then again. She dug into the matted roots with her fingers. She measured the distance from the creek bend. She looked at the crop rows behind it. Then she asked, "Who designed this?" Lena almost laughed. "My grandfather, I suppose." Nora Bell looked at the notebook, then at Lena's own pages, where the dates, watermarks, and rain notes had been written in pencil. "You kept all this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Since March?" "Yes, ma'am." Nora turned another page. "Most people want answers after the damage. You were asking questions before it." Lena did not know what to say to that, so she said what her father would have said. "The creek gives plenty of warning if a person has time to watch it." Nora smiled. "That sounds like something worth teaching." The following spring, Otis Barlow left a strip of grass along his bend by the sycamores. He complained about it constantly, said it looked ugly, said he hated losing the planting space, said every man driving by would think he had gone soft in the head. But he left it. Wade Mercer stopped plowing all the way down to his ditch line. Harold Pike planted native grass where his bank had collapsed. 2 farms farther down Red Fork did the same. At the feed store, when someone joked that Mill Creek Road was turning into pasture, Otis Barlow looked up from his coffee and said, "Laugh if you want. I've already tried mud." That story reached Lena before sundown. For the first time in a long while, she laughed until Elias asked what was funny. She told him. He smiled with his eyes closed. By then, Elias had grown weaker. He had good days and bad days. On good days, he sat on the porch and watched the field. On bad days, he stayed inside and listened while Lena told him what was happening beyond the window. He lived long enough to see men come to his daughter for advice. He lived long enough to see the bank letter replaced by a receipt stamped paid. He lived long enough to see the low field green again, with one wild strip standing guard between the rows and the creek. One evening, near the end of his 3rd summer after the flood, Lena came back from walking Otis's field and found her father on the porch. The sun was low. The wild grass moved in the wind. Red Fork Creek shone through the trees like a thin piece of glass. Elias patted the chair beside him. Lena sat. For a while, neither spoke. Then, Elias said, "I used to think keeping this farm meant working every inch of it." Lena looked at him. "And now I think maybe it means knowing which parts not to touch." Lena swallowed. The field blurred slightly in front of her. Elias reached for her hand. "Your grandfather would have trusted you with this place." She tried to smile. "You think so?" "I know so." His voice was thin but certain. "And I do too." That was the sentence Lena carried longer than the bank letter, longer than Otis's insult, longer than the laughter from the fence. Because there are words that wound, and there are words that put a person back inside themselves. Years later, when people told the story, they liked to say Lena Hartwell saved her father's farm by leaving it unplowed. That was not quite true. She did not leave the whole field. She left the part everyone else had forgotten how to read. She left the rough ground, the ugly strip, the place men called weeds because they could not see what it was holding. And when the flood came, the thing they mocked took the first beating. The field lived behind it. So did the farm. So did a little piece of wisdom that had been waiting in an old notebook above a shed, patient as seed, until someone young enough to be laughed at and brave enough not to answer finally gave it room to grow. Lena never said the flood proved her right. She said the flood proved the land had been speaking all along. People just had to stop plowing long enough to listen. If you enjoy stories about family, resilience, and the kind of wisdom people often overlook until it's almost too late, subscribe to Willow Field Stories. We tell stories like this every week.